Right, so hello, I'm Toshi Omagari. I'm a typeface designer, so I make fonts. So I guess that's a quite different topic for computing history. I'm mainly talking about design, especially graphics of letter forms. And I think today the theme of the day is kind of like outsiders making, stuff. So typography in gaming generally haven't been really consulted by professionals in the field, so they are making stuff as they go along. So also they are usually made by Japanese people, so there are lots of things being figured out. So including the language. So this is a famous example. So you can see sometimes see this kind of stuff in letter forms as well. So yeah, when I talk about arcade game typography, typography can include like logos, like logo types above. But today I'm mainly talking about these small ones, the smallest piece, the building blocks of information in video games. And you can't really remove this kind of stuff. And the legibility, the design of this can also influence the game design. And in this presentation, I'm focusing on 8 by 8 pixels typefaces, because those are generally the smallest ones and the most popular ones that I could find in most video games. So I could find the largest collection. And they tended to be monospaced, and that's usually due to the fact that they were all usually made in Japan. They didn't really try proportional until much later. Proportional meaning each letter having its own width, so the W and W is much wider than I, for example. And they are all Latin. I have a few non-Latin examples, but mostly Latin. And to focus on the collection, I only consulted arcade games. I could do like Genesis or Super Nintendo games, but generally speaking, arcade was where the latest trends were. So if you look at arcade games, you could basically collect the best examples of the industry of the time. So I basically played all the arcade games, spending I don't know, more than a year every night and every weekend after work, before wedding or before marriage. So yeah. I don't think I can ever do this again, but yeah. And I ended up with 1,600 unique typeface families. And if I include color variations, that can easily go up to like 5,000. And what I'm not going to talk about today are these proportional ones, for example. And even though I said they're mostly monospaced, there were some proportional ones, usually from Williams and Midway games, because they had proportional systems. Due to technical reasons, I couldn't really collect graphics from MAME, basically. And it also doesn't include these vector graphics games. This one actually doesn't show up quite well, but this is from Star Wars, based on the second best film of the three, only three. Anyway, but yeah, I'm not going to talk about this today. And starting with the most famous example is Atari typeface. And it still says Sprint 2. Atari in 1976, I think there was another studio, a smaller one called Key Games. They made a game called The Quiz Show, and quiz games need a lot of letters, so they made a typeface for that. So actually, the name Sprint 2 is the second game they used this typeface. And it has a really basic attributes, like it has like 2 stem thicknesses vertically and 1 thickness horizontally. And the common theme in this video game fonts is that they have 8 pixel grids. Each letter has 8 by 8 pixels, but they never really occupy full 8 pixels because you need space. You need letter space and line space. That's why they generally use 7 by 7. This is how it looks. It was still monochrome. And if you wanted to use color, they put like a color cellophane tape on the screen. And going back to Sprint 2, yeah, so the typeface became really famous when Namco started using it. Namco at the time was an importer of Atari games in Japan, but at one point they started making their own games, and the best typefaces they knew was this Atari typeface. And I don't know if there was any modification to the letter fonts apart from the spacing. Oh, yeah, the uppercase E, that's slightly different. The original design had a longer bar at the bottom, but this one actually aligns everything. And the T moves quite a bit, so the spacing strategy has changed also in I. I don't know which one works better, but yeah, that's what they decided to do. And also in the Atari typeface, they made a distinction between 0 and O by adding kind of diagonal calligraphic contrast to 0. And there's a small variation in Galaxian, yeah, like these. So Galaxian has more sharper edge to the diagonal letters. This is how it looks. Namco was also the first company that added lowercase to this set, and it wasn't really successful. I mean, these are Japanese design. They didn't really understand how you should align things in lowercase. Like there's an X height, lowercase height, so-called, but they don't really stick to that. And yeah, the G, you can't really do anything with G. You have to make a compromise. But ascender of the T generally is shorter than, say, that of H, but it goes all the way up. And for some reason, they thought these so-called in strokes and out strokes were important, so they kept them as a dot. This is another example, and I don't think they were actually trying to match the uppercase and lowercase in terms of the thickness. This one's Atari's own design, so I think it's much more successful in terms of the height alignment of this 4 pixels. Is it 5? It's 5 pixels, and the stem thickness. And this one, because the only graphic guy working in the team was one person, I can confidently say probably was designed by the lead architect of PlayStation now. Who's that guy? The name of the guy? Mark Cerny, yes, yeah. So I think Mark Cerny designed this. And there's a interesting use of secondary color as anti-aliasing, but it's only a very few places that I don't think it's quite effective yet, but that starts to become a trend, the use of multicolor. That's quite different from regular typography. Until these times, pixel fonts are just single color, and that's what generally people use these arcade typeface for. But the fun really starts when you start looking at the multicolored fonts. And whenever I see multiple color variations, I have these two so-called palette swaps. And this one, Tetris, because it's a Russian-themed game, Atari had a reversed R for very easy Russian, theming. And for a more real Russian example, I think this is the only one of 3 actual Russian examples. There's a Cyrillic design. So this is, I think one letter is missing. No, not one letter, but The 4 is missing, but I think the 4 was actually using the letter che from this one. So there's a similar letter in Cyrillic. So yeah, you had to save space as much as possible. So there was a repeating shape. They didn't do it. Having said that, there's a O and 0. I don't know why. And on the other side of the pond, on the other side of the Cold War, there's a very American-looking typeface that has like two colors, like red and blue as a shadow color, which is quite interesting. And I say this is American because of the way it's used in the game, well, the theme of the game. So it is a game that, well, it's a side-scrolling game that you fight the enemy, but you don't actually fight the enemy by yourself. You have backup dollars. You throw money, the dollars at the enemy, and the enemy will join by your side, and they fight on your behalf against their former comrades. So yeah, it's a game of capitalism, and it doesn't have a lowercase, so it's a capital capital only. Yeah. So yeah, that's a very American game, I guess. And another example by Capcom in a similar style. And I think it has a really interesting detail, which is that the X height is 4 pixels, which means you sometimes need to sacrifice like in like lowercase e and s. But I think this e actually works quite well. You also notice that this is actually 6 pixels in height and 8 pixels in width. So actually, the shadow doesn't really, destroy the spacing, and you can, add the shadow effect for free without affecting space. So that was a really common effect. So you see a lot of them. And I think it also uses like 7 colors. So this is 6 colors and, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 colors and 8 as a shadow, which is actually a quite expensive thing. So generally, you didn't use like more than 4 colors in, say, 8-bit era. So this is very much of like a Super Nintendo or PlayStation era kind of thing. So when we are talking about bits in 8-pixel fonts, we are talking about generally about the number of colors used. At least for this one, the V and W might be too thin, so they are not quite successful in these letters. And sounds bold. So I'm generally going through these different styles today. And Paperboi, it uses 8 pixels in height, but I don't think they ever typeset this font in solid line. So there was always a line space, 8 pixels of line space in between. So at least for the way they used it, it probably didn't matter. Afterburner uses this really chunky looking typeface, which is actually an adaptation of the existing typeface called Stop. Stop looks like this. And this one actually, the larger version is used in Alien Syndrome. So somebody at Sega was a fan of this typeface. It is a quite difficult design to adapt. For example, the K doesn't have a stem on the left-hand side. So that's the same with H and R. So if you see K, H, R, yeah, there's a modification. So yeah, they made the right decision, and it looks like this. So you can see at the bottom, like this. This is as thick as you can get in 8 pixels. It uses like 5 pixels maximum. So that's quite a lot. Lowercase is not so much, but it also uses like a golden gradient. So it is really interesting, and I love this lowercase g. And this is another great looking typeface. Well, it looks more vibrant on my screen, but yeah. And it's really nice that it has like a vertical gradient on the letters and horizontal gradation on the numbers. I don't think it matters, but they were trying to make the letters and numbers look a bit different. So first and second, they have a different orientation. And what I find really nice is that the uppercase N kind of has like a layered stroke, almost like a double layer. The vertical strokes kind of goes under the diagonal. And the A looks like he wants to go to toilet, closed brackets. And the X looks like a fan. I love it. This typeface only shows up in a high score screen. And one of my favorites, thick typeface, is this Dance Dance Revolution typeface. It looks like a really clear jelly kind of looking typeface, and it has, I don't know how many letters, how many colors in there, but it has a gradation in the shadows as well. So it's really like a 32-bit luxury of, in terms of use of colors. And I also like the top-heavy design. That's quite consistent. So the top is 2 pixels, and the bottom is 1 usually. Well, with the exception of 6. 6 could have, swapped the contrast here. I don't know why it's a bit thick in the middle. And this one is really, really, really bold, and it sometimes sacrifices the bottom counter of B. So it was not really legible, and they were found in the graphic data of the game, but they were never used in an actual game. So they made a right decision, in my opinion. Yeah, it looks pretty hard when it's in text. On the other side, the lighter version, Gradius. There are lots of this squared angular shapes. What I can say about this is that it's not as straightforward as you might think in terms of how the shadows are applied. You see, this is like 1 pixel down, but here it's 1 pixel down and to the right. So I think these ones actually not as legible as K. I also really like this uppercase Q. This is really nice. And in Gradius 3, the letter forms look more rounder, so it becomes a little more legible or easier on the eye. The Gradius 2 actually uses the same typeface as 1. It's hard to say which is my favorite. They have like a different pros and cons. I don't think I like this W, but in this one, W is more successful, for example. And Diamond Run, this is from Australia, and this was actually made by one guy, this whole game. And I really like this round shape, and this Z is really an unusual shape for a capital letter, but I think it's really nice. Like this 2, that's making a loop here. And 0 is a bit shorter, which actually really looks really nice in like high scores when the 0 is always short. And 6 is like almost like a middle finger. And I played the game, and I enjoy the typeface more than the game itself. So, I mean, he still makes video games, but yeah, I think he might have been a better typeface designer. I think he actually sued Mojang Games for claiming that he actually made the first Minecraft before Mojang. I don't think it went anywhere, but yeah. And this one is a thinner design from XMen. It's a really standard-looking, very nice typeface. And I think this one, this game is more famously known for the funny English dialogue, which is that, do you know the famous line? Magneto says, "X-Men, welcome to die." It's actually like a 6-player 2-screen game, so it's a really gorgeous gameplay experience. But yeah, it's a Japanese game. This is a Spanish one based theme around Egypt. Doesn't do much to the design of the typeface, but I think it makes great use of the fact that it's a kind of thin design. So sometimes it has like 2 pixel rows, columns. So it has a really thick shadow, right? And MICR, which is MICR is a kind of how can I say, the particular design of numbers to make banking processing really efficient. And so in a typeface forms, it used to look like this. Basically, in banks, all the numbers were manually processed, read by human eyes, and somebody in the 60s made a magnetic recognition machine, not optical, but they invented magnetic ink, and yeah, they made this kind of really funny-looking numbers to automatically process numbers, usually on like checks and stuff. And somebody thought that was a great idea to expand into a whole typeface. So this is the first one called Westminster. But I think a more famous example is this Data 70 from Letraset. This typeface looked really futuristic and became super popular in films and, of course, video games. So Data 70 is a really small, group of typefaces, but in arcade games, it's a category all of its own. So this is one example from Grobda. So Grobda, Xevious, the famous one, but it wasn't like a straight adaptation of Data 70. It was like a spiritual successor or adaptation. You can see that in the capital R, where the stem thickness switches. And this is also like a similar kind of idea being applied. I love the G, for example. This is so cool. I love the lowercase a. That's topologically it must be a, but it's so broken, but it still works. So I love that. I think this kind of design is, I think maybe it was possible because the Japanese didn't really know how to form these shapes in terms of calligraphy and tradition. So they did just whatever they thought it was fun. So I think not knowing the norm probably helped. And this one applies the thickness at the bottom left generally. So the whole letter almost looks slanted. And this one actually has a slanted lowercase that has nothing to do with the Data 70. So it's a pretty funny font if you think about it. It has like a Data 70 capitals and just italic letters. But, there's no rule, so yeah, why not? And at this point, some of you might be thinking how I did all this. What you have been seeing so far, there are actual fonts that you can type in Microsoft Word if you want to, at least on Mac, and InDesign and all these applications. The way I did it is I played all these games in MAME, that's an arcade emulator, and there's a special way to just see the graphics. Not all games, and you can see, you can extract these graphic images and extract as a font and throw that to a font editor, and well, this green-looking G, that's a font editor on Mac called Glyphs. And to make designs, I used Firefox and InDesign. And until actually 2017, InDesign didn't support color fonts, so it was actually quite recent that I could, make that book at all. So that's a brief story, a brief break. Onto the serif. Serif wasn't really a popular category due to serifs taking more space horizontally speaking, and the serif designs tend to have more condensed proportions than usual. What I like about this one is that it has like a double serif in the eye. So That's quite unusual. This one is from a really famous fighting game, Street Fighter 2. Like that, the capital W and M doesn't have any, tip in the center. This is how it looks. It's used here. And this is like a space shooting game. You are like a satellite shooting down incoming meteorites and alien ships, but the typeface itself is kind of like a Western themed. At least the color is more sci-fi. But I think it's a really nice design. And this one is for proper Western game, Sunset Riders from Konami. Great game, and it has like a golden coloration. It also is a stencil typeface. Stencil being, there's a breaking all these letter strokes. And this is a really popular typeface by Capcom. This typeface shows up in Strider and Darkstalkers, lots of Capcom classics. They later added lowercase to this. So this is like one of the earliest examples of thin designs. And what I like about this is the uppercase Q. The Q, they probably wanted like a Q tail to be, waving like this, but I like intentionally misinterpreted this as like two broken strokes. So it's like probably they intended Q to flow like this. So because the resolution is so low, you can have this kind of fun sometimes. So this is actually a typeface that I released. I think it works. And here's a typeface. I think it's from South Korea, if I'm not mistaken. And Playgirls is there are lots of adult themes games. I think it was like I don't know. I don't think it was a mahjong game. But there are lots of like pornographic ones, and this was one of them. So it has to be pink. And yeah, you can see, for example, the Z, like, Japanese or Korean people not knowing how the letter forms should be designed. So sometimes they make this kind of mistakes. So you can have fun with that. Like, there are lots of words in English that you might not sometimes know whether it's supposed to be Z or S. So, that's quite convenient. And slanted is a really tricky style to do in 8 pixels. And this one, I don't think it's successful, and it's quite messy, but it's one of the earliest examples. So if you look at this, you can kind of read it when you actually set text, but there are cases like life. I don't know what this thing is, but yeah, it's sometimes really hard. And as Konami tries, I think it reads better. Konami later makes a bold version of it, so it looks like this. Not entirely successful, but to make a bold and italic is quite a challenge. And Football Frenzy by SNK, so this is a football game. It's quite successful design. It's almost like a slanted version of the Atari typeface. And I love this one. This is a hachamecha fighter. It's a horizontal shooting game. Nice pixelation. And what I like about this is actually this and Japanese. And yeah, it has just Japanese kind of designs. And generally speaking, even though most games included Japanese in 8 pixels, they really didn't have anything more complex, let's say Hango or kanji. And in like quiz games, for example, like this, they put 16 by 16 pixel fonts. But for 8 by 8, you don't really see anything more complex than those hiraganas and katakanas. So these Asian fonts did exist in larger fonts. It's just that it's was outside my scope this time. And this is a great one. This is, I think it's using like 4 or 5 different colors, and it has like a speedy line at the top, and looks quite, how can I say, well, not necessarily soft, but really nicely anti-aliased. It almost doesn't look monospaced. And King of Fighters has upright and italic form. So yeah, and the sequel, I think it has like a bold and bold italic. So, you know, if you think about Microsoft Office, you have B and I button that gives you regular italic, bold, and bold italic. And King of Fighters is the only game series that has actually filled the metrics of 4 styles. Some are more successful than the others, so like that. And calligraphic and handwritten, this is the second last category. Venture by XD, this, I think it wants to make a like a medieval Lombardic capitals. This one, Gal's Panic 2, this is another pornographic game. And this one, yeah, again, it has to be pink because it's pornographic. That was the thing of the 80s and 90s. This one is a vertical shooter game that has like a really nice cursive kind of Renaissance italic form. And even though it's only 2 colors, it's actually I think nicely pixelated, and it's one of my favorites. And Asterisk, that's you know, the famous Belgian comic or French comic, I don't know. Is it, which one?
I think it's Belgian.
Belgian, yeah. And it has the iconic eye with a dot. And it looks like this in the game. So you can see at the top, top left. Yeah. And in more Japan-themed games, you can see, you know, kind of brush stroke designs as well. So in fighting games like this ninja fighting game and Samurai Showdown as well, SNK was really good at this stuff. And decorative is, well, lots of typefaces you have seen so far are, you know, decorative anyway. But what I mean, well, what I want to choose in decorative especially is that the kind of style that only makes sense in multi-colors. You know, this one you can make single color style, but that's not the point of this typeface. And yeah, that's what I mean by decorative. This typeface only shows up in a high score screen, but it, I like this experimental use of colors. This one, Black Heart, it's kind of hard to see, but it has like a gradation in shadows. I think, yeah, and it has like a single one-sided stroke thickness here. That's also nice. I love the color use of colors in here. And Hydra, this one has like a 3D emboss effect on the existing typeface. That's this review. Actually, the Sega's Afterburner uses a review as in the logotype. And this one is actually a very good adaptation of the review typeface. And on top of that, they added a 3D effect. Aqua, which is really nice in like letters like 8 and 6 and S. Usually when you have 8, you have 3 strokes stacked, and there must be a space. But here there's no space, but thanks to the emboss effect, you can count the strokes without spacing here. So I find it really genius. And this one is really cool. This one, in terms of letter forms, it's like a MICR typeface, but it has 2 frames, 2 frames of animation. And what they were trying to do is interlacing effect. So I will show you the demo. Can you see? They were doing this in animation for whatever reason. Interlacing is something we don't really like to have, but for this game, they wanted to have this interlacing effect. So, and the larger fonts, and all the letters I've been showing so far, the 8 pixels fonts wasn't really the only graphic assets in the game. From the very earliest games, you can see, for example, Darius. That's an adaptation of the same typeface in 16 by 16 pixel grid. It's like this. And Drag Race from 77. The capital U, for some reason, isn't really successful, but they were trying to adapt this same typeface to 16 by 16. So I don't want to give you the idea that 8 by 8 pixel was the whole thing. And I was trying to make a higher resolution version of the 8 pixels typeface in a variety of ways, but none of them really hit the same kind of design philosophy. So my conclusion here is that 8 by 8 pixels isn't really a compromised or lower version of something. It has its own design logic and philosophy. So that's why I was really interested in here. For example, like, how do you interpret this corner? You can do this, but they're not the same shape. So this is a kind of design choice that only makes in 8 by 8 pixels. Nevertheless, I wanted to show some examples of larger typefaces. So Space Harrier, for example, apart from the logotype, this is the set of typefaces they were using, like this. So a smaller one here, large one here. Yeah. This typeface for this 16 by 16, actually, this is how they were designed, by the way. This is a mistake. And they use the same typeface in the next game, Outrun. In Outrun, the V is actually shifted up. So this is the original typeface. This is what happens in 16 by 16 pixel games. Because it has more pixel grid, it becomes much easier to adapt something that already exists. So naturally, it's less interesting. But this one is a really nice adaptation. ITC Pioneer, by the way, you can recognize it from these things. I just hit the, the word. Anyway, it's a famous scene. Anyway, now quite popular display typeface from the time. And this game, Puzzly, this is a fishing game, and I think it's quite nice. It makes use of the fact that you have multiple colors. This kind of queue really doesn't make sense in one color typeface. It's a fact, yeah. I think it's a great use of multicolor, and the same idea survives in 8 by 8. And this is another nice looking typeface, set of typefaces. Another is this one, Black Heart. Again, you saw this typeface, but the 16 by 16, it has a very different display face that sometimes goes a little too crazy. So as the time went on, like starting with early 90s, like 92 or 93, the industry started to move on to higher resolution from like 200s and 300s pixels to 400, 500, and now we have thousands and thousands of pixels. So, for example, the first 3D games were, from like 92 in virtual racing. This one is year after that, 93, and this is a pixelated typeface. I think it's like already like 32 by 32 pixels, so it's really, really large. And generally, the pixelated typefaces or pixelated graphics of all kinds, become quite inefficient. So industry start to move on to outline-based or vector-based fonts, like computers. So nowadays all these video games just use standard computer fonts, and it has become much easier to use fonts. That's good, but we also lost a bit of all these crazy color fonts out of pixelation. So yeah, I hope there will be some some more coming back. More than this, I mean, it's nice that we have like a retro trend, but generally they're still using Atari fonts, but I think they're more to be rediscovered and revived. So 8x8 pixels stayed really popular for, I think, more practical reason as well, which is that the arcade games didn't really evolve in terms of the size of the CRT display, because they were generally 17 to, or 19 inches, because you basically, have a display here. It doesn't have to be huge. And the vertical resolutions remained relatively similar to the mid-90s. So 8 pixel fonts generally stayed like above 27 points. That's a really good size, pretty legible size. So there was like a really, how can I say, guaranteed legibility in 8x8 pixels. But now things are different. You have very tiny devices like Nintendo Switch, all the way to projector, and the typography, the legibility has become a moving target. And you actually have this on the Nintendo Switch screen. I cannot read it when I'm, play it on mobile. So, yeah, back in the early days, typography was unintentionally easier, I guess. And you see this industry struggle here. For example, this is for Horizon 4 from a few years ago. You have this tiny subtitle here, and this got so many complaints, and this later became updated, and the subtitle looks much more legible. So this is before the update and after the update, like this. So yeah, there's a lot of relearning on the accessibility front. So that's what the industry is doing in terms of typography. So I think, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, this is, I got this shirt in Soho in London. There's like a shirt shop run by French designers. I think it's on Greek Street in Soho. Yeah. Yeah.
Has any of these arcade typographies made its way into your personal work? Like, not just the ones you've done it a direct copy, but have you noticed that, what I'm doing, it looks a bit like Afterburner, or
Well, it certainly freed myself from the conventional typography, typeface design education. I started taking more liberal decisions in my daily work. I also got into monospace typeface design, so I have made monospace only typeface what's that word? Library or catalog. So, yeah, my body of work recently has way more monospace work than other people. Yep.
Was it possible to do the more ornate non-Latin fonts like Chinese fonts? Presumably you need more pixels to make that work.
Yeah, to do that, you need more pixels, and once you have more pixels, it almost becomes pointless to, because the appeal of this kind of design is to have low pixels. So, yeah.
Did Korean work?
Korean would, yeah. Arabic would work, and Indic works. It's just that the Chinese and Japanese, those are the tricky ones. Yeah.
Do you have rights or copyrights on these fonts, or can you use them, for example,
I think depends on how it looks. I mean, this is less than 10% of the video game content, I think. So I think generally the 10% rule, I don't know if it applies to video game contents, but yeah. But I did ask the every gaming company publisher for inclusion of the book. Some companies didn't allow it, so yeah, I'm following their agreement.
But many presumably don't exist anymore.
Yeah, for those cases it was easy. I just didn't have to. Yeah.
It's not even the creator.
No, generally speaking, well, sometimes it's really tricky. The publisher thinks this, the studio has the copyright. The studio thinks the other way. So I ask both parties, and they don't claim the copyright sometimes.
So if they wouldn't let you use the font, but instead maybe you just included a screenshot from the game, did you get away with that?
Well, I think the best way is probably not to ask. I mean, it's probably fine. It's probably within fair use. But once you ask, they will have a say. Yeah.
How would you go about creating a font?
I'm sorry.
How would you go about creating a font?
Creating?
Yeah, making one.
On Pixel phones or regular phones? Pixel phones. Yeah, it's. I don't know if I can show you quickly, but it is pretty easy. So, for example, this is a glyphs. C. There's a pixel. Right. Oh wait.
That's glyph.
This is glyphs. Yeah. So I can draw things already, and can I assign? Well, sorry, the interface is in Japanese, but palettes. Okay, there you go. Second color. Okay, should work. Is it color? No, color. Wait. Oh, it doesn't look. Wait. Well, I guess you have to take my words for it. I mean, it takes time to actually recreate. It works, and you can use it on like a web browser. You can use it on Illustrator, basically anywhere. There's no one color format that works everywhere. You have to have multiple formats, so it's not as convenient as just having one font. But yeah, the technology is there.
So presumably for 8x8 fonts, you would just do it like pixel by pixel. You wouldn't, I don't know, have some technology that would scan and sort of algorithmically reduce the font down. You just have a human just choosing each pixel.
Yeah, if you start with a larger format and reduce down to 8 pixels automatically, the result is usually terrible.
Yeah.
So it's not faster than just manually pixelating. Anyway, yes.
Do you think that the 8x8 pixel constraint actually boosted creativity back then compared to now when we have kind of unlimited ways
Yeah,
to do things?
that's my argument. When you have 8x8 pixels, you might think there's only a few, but like I said, I've found thousands of them. So I don't think there's any limit to creativity.
In that case, once again, thank you very much, sir. Excellent talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.